the book. So when I tell people that I'm working on translating a book called Die Wise, I'm asked if it's a book about what happens after death, or if it's a book about, you know, how to overcome the death of a loved one. And of course, it's neither. So my question is, how would you describe it? And has this actually changed over the last year? What Die Wise means to you? Has that changed?
Yeah. Well, let's use a few of the standard examples that they ask you. First of all, is it a book about what happens after you die? Of course it is. But it's not a metaphysical book, really. I suppose there's a little bit in there, but generally speaking, it's a physical book, not a metaphysical book. In other words, it's as this worldly a book as I was able to manage. So the answer to the question, is it a book about what happens after you die? Yes, but not what happens to you after you die. It's a book about what happens to the rest of us after you die. You see, so it is an after death book, absolutely. But isn't it strange? We have a very strange expression in English, the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it for a second, you begin to realize, wait a minute, there's no such thing as the afterlife. What do you mean? I mean this, the word life includes everything. It even includes the stuff that doesn't seem to be life. It seems to be the opposite of life, like death. But you know, any farmer in your country or mine knows full well that if there's no death, there's no life, because you won't have any earth. That's where it comes from. So there's really, in every philosophical and existential way you can mean it, there's no such thing as after life, because life includes that too. So there's just life, and then there's more life, and then there's another kind of life, and then there's a life where we don't get to see you anymore, and so on, you see? So this is not just wordplay. It really helps clarify your understanding of what it means to be alive and what it includes, right? So secondly, is it a book that helps you get over the death of a loved one? I hope not. I hope nobody can use it that way. I mean, people might try, but they won't be able to successfully avoid the death or overcome the death of someone close to them by reading anything that I've written or listening to anything I've said. My principal responsibility to them, to people I haven't met and to people I have, is to have found a language and a way of thinking about this and speaking about it, where the realities of dying appear in what I'm saying. So it's not like you have to choose between what dying is like and listening to Jenkinson. If Jenkinson is having a good day, then listening to him is something like dying. That the realities are there. Now, I've never said that out loud before, but as soon as I say it, I realize not only do I think that's true, but I'm rather proud of that, because I worked very hard at dealing with the current language that banished as much as it was able the realities of dying. And I tried to make a language that welcomed the realities of dying and understood them to be a very noble kind of work to do. Not just noble for me, but for the dying people as well. Then finally, this is a pretty good memory so early in the morning to remember your question so accurately. No, I'm quite pleased. So thirdly, although you didn't mention the pandemic, you did ask me, did I think the events of the last year have any consequence for what the book can be or do in the life of someone who reads it? This is an immense scaled question here. And, you know, it's not clear that we have enough time to do justice to it just with this one question. But I'll try a little bit in a short form. Yes, like a lot of people did, I lost basically a year's worth of work. You couldn't say I lost it because I never had it. It just never happened. We were going to come to Istanbul again, I think you know, with my band and a bunch of other things. And absolutely nothing's happened, of course. And it's caused me to wonder, as I've done a few live stream events and things like that, whether or not something that's written in peacetime way useful in a war of and thought of and worked upon and then finally delivered in a time of relative is in any way, does it have any place when the weather turns and you're in a storm? My answer, I think, is yes, in a qualified way. The thing that is going to make me sound monstrous to you probably is that we had of piles of bodies in the street, you know, kind of medieval horror show with nobody to bury anybody and the rest. Apparently there's a very few places where this did happen in the very early going. You know, mass graves were dug and so forth. But generally speaking, we know now that the greatest fears we had about the pandemic in the early going never can occur. Death didn't occur. And we have, you know, legions of people affected by something that they'll never get sick from. That the pandemic has altered their lives fundamentally in other words, then, most places in the world are reacting to our reactions to the pandemic and not the pandemic directly. To take an obvious example, myself, I know one person who knows one person who died of the pandemic. That's it. That's my total personal engagement with the plague itself. The rest of it, 99.9% of everything I've heard and I've felt and I've wondered about, and this very question comes from no direct access to the plague, but tremendous secondary comments to its presence. So, I suppose you could say my greatest concern about it is that we will, in the West at least, find a way to live a life as if none of this happened. I think that's probably one of the goals, certainly of the marketplace, probably of the various political agendas across the world, to resume a degree of normality whereby people start paying taxes again and start buying stuff, and you know, the same old used to be, as we say. And here's the sad truth. It's very likely that our normal life is what brought the pandemic to us. And the idea of restoring our normal life as a sane response to that is insane. It's spiritually damaged and a damaging proposition. So then if I come to your question and I wonder about the place that my little work, you know, a couple of books and a few things, the place that it occupies in that dilemma, I would say that I looked at death phobia 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, and I responded to it in a way that I believe to be useful to people now when they're looking at pandemic phobia, right? I mean, I'm going to use a very strange formulation in English now. We're in a circumstance where we can die of each other. That's the principal cause of death. Each other and an unguarded moment, right? I mean, a circumstance like that used to be reserved for unintended pregnancy, right? That people could get pregnant from an unguarded moment, too close together, and you understand what I'm saying. And so we have exactly the same dilemma now with respect to this pandemic. An unguarded moment, too close together, 7 days later, and you're having a hard time breathing, and so on, from what I hear. So the solution has become, in a strange way, to insulate yourself against the principal cause of the pandemic, which is other people. Okay? In other words, the phobia I talked about in Diewise is being rewarded now. As long as you develop a solid aversion to other human beings, particularly in public places, you're likely to be okay. So what's the phobia? And begin to trust the presence of other people in their lives that they don't know. I'm not sure that this is going to pass easily amongst the people who are alive today during the course of their lifetime. The real effects of this thing might take 2 or 3 generations to disappear from the planet as the kind of phobic memories of the pandemic period die with them. That's probably what it'll take. So if you look at Diewise, I'm not recommending that anybody should, but if they do, one of the things that they'll begin to pandemic, to have a book that's useful in a pandemic. In other words, you have a choice when you're putting a pen to paper. You either take a discrete subject and write a book about that, or you write a book about many things that knows that that particular something is there. In other words, I wrote Diewise as if people don't want to die. I didn't always talk about it in the book, but I always talked as if it's there. That was true 5, 6, 7 years ago. It's at least as true today. Long answers, huh?